Picture a winter evening in the Viking North. Outside, the wind scrapes along the walls of a turf-roofed longhouse, dragging icy sleet across the doorway. Inside, the world is another planet. Orange firelight, blue smoke, the smell of mutton stew, wet wool, and bodies that have worked all day. This is not a warrior's hall from the movies. This is a home. Look slowly around this single long room. Shields hang high on the posts, but below them cradle frames swing, and a loom stands ready with half-woven cloth. On one side, a row of chests, the real safes of this world, holds the fine cloth, the silver, the bride's dowry carefully folded away. The floor is packed earth scattered with rushes. The fire down the center crackles and spits, painting everyone's faces in restless light. On the main bench, a man and woman sit shoulder to shoulder, but not quite touching. His cloak is trimmed with fur and badly mended in one place. Hers is plain but clean, fastened with a good brooch. He is the head of this household, the man whose name will be remembered in legal cases and sagas. She holds the keys at her belt, real iron keys, heavy and cold. Those keys say, "I control the doors, the stores, the food, the cloth. Nothing in this house truly happens without me." Listen to the sounds. Cutlery against wooden bowls. A baby fussing near the far wall. Someone laughing too loudly at a story about a raid that probably didn't happen exactly that way. But if you look closer, you can see other kinds of tension. On the next bench down, a young couple sit a little too far apart to be newly married. At the hearth, a widow refills an older man's cup with just enough warmth to keep him hopeful, but not enough to promise anything. This is the real Viking story of love, sex, and marriage, not just ships and axes, but beds, bargains, and whispered fears. Behind every raid is a household that has to survive without its men for months. Behind every alliance there is a marriage contract, negotiated like a business deal. Behind many feuds there is a broken promise involving a bride, a bed, or a child who never arrived. The man on the high bench stares into the fire, jaw tight. He is thinking about the next summer, whether he should send a ship, whether he can trust his neighbors, whether his enemies will take advantage if his sons leave. Underneath all that, buried deep, is a quieter worry. If I die out there, will my sons inherit smoothly, or will this marriage I made for advantage explode in their faces? His wife shifts slightly, feeling the weight of the keys on her hip. She's thinking about different things: the dwindling grain, the daughter who is nearly of marriageable age, the foster son who seems too attached to the serving girl. She glances around the hall and silently ranks the people here: useful, dangerous, loyal, unpredictable. For her, every relationship in this room is a potential rope, one that can either hold the house together or strangle it. When we say Vikings, we usually picture charging warriors and burning monasteries. But most Viking lives were spent in rooms like this, with worries like these. Who marries whom? Who sleeps where? Who is faithful? Who is not? And what happens when someone pushes too far? The answers to those questions decide who has allies at the assembly, who has someone to help harvest the hay, who has children to inherit the land. In the chapters ahead, we're going to stay inside rooms like this. We'll sit on these benches, stand by this fire, listen at these doors. We'll see how spouses were chosen, how wedding nights were staged, how affairs began and ended, and what happened when the private world of desire crashed into the public world of law and honor. And as you watch these people move around the fire, consider this: they're not that different from us. They worry about security, companionship, betrayal, getting older, being alone. The tools are different: no dating apps, more axes, but the questions are oddly familiar. By the time we leave this hall, you may find that Viking love lives feel uncomfortably close to home. Let's go outside, to a farmyard on a raw spring morning. The air is cold enough to sting your nose, but the snow has melted into mud and puddles. Chickens scratch in the muck, a dog barks at strangers, and two groups of people face each other across the yard like small armies. This is not a romantic proposal scene. No flowers, no kneeling, no sunset. This is a negotiation. On one side, the bride's family, her father, perhaps a brother or an uncle, and her mother hovering in the doorway, pretending she's only watching the pot on the fire. On the other side, the groom's family, his father, a couple of serious-faced male relatives, and somewhere behind them the young man himself, shifting his weight from foot to foot, trying to look calm. The men talk numbers. They talk munder, the bride price the groom's family will pay, and dowry, the property, cloth, livestock, and household goods the bride will bring. They talk about land, how much, where, what kind of soil. They talk about obligations in case of feud, who will support whom if someone from either family ends up dead on the wrong patch of ground. It sounds like a mix of legal contract and very tense shopping trip. Where's the girl in all this? Look to the side of the scene. She's at the doorway, perhaps, pretending to mend a sleeve, or near the barn, hauling water with another woman. She hears every word. In theory, Viking women have some say. In practice, how much say you really have depends on your family's character, your own courage, and how desperate people are. Inside her chest, two currents swirl. One is hope. Maybe this man will be kind. Maybe his home will be warmer. Maybe his mother will like me. Maybe I'll finally have a bed of my own instead of sharing with my sisters. The other is fear. If I say no, will they listen? If I say yes, am I walking into a life I can never escape? Young men are not purely free agents either. The groom's father may have pushed for this match because it brings good hayfields or strong allies. Perhaps the son had someone else in mind, a girl whose laugh he knows already, who doesn't come with such heavy expectations. But a wise son knows better than to fight too hard if the family's future is tied to this bargain. He swallows his feelings and rehearses the role of happy bridegroom. If you could see this scene from above, you'd see dozens like it scattered across valleys and fjords. Daughters traded slightly up to improve family standing, or slightly sideways to cement peace. Sons married into houses that will back them at the thing. Widows moved like precious game pieces onto squares that shore up a cousin's position. It looks cold-blooded from a distance. Up close, it is messy, human, and full of quiet compromise. Even here, people try to smuggle in their wishes. A mother might insist on a clause about where her daughter will live, not too far, so she can visit. A father might bargain for fosterage, sending his son to be raised for a time in the groom's household, knitting the families closer. A clever girl might whisper to a sympathetic uncle, "At least let him be sober and not too old," and find that this request is, sometimes, honored. Finally, a deal is struck. Hands are clasped, witnesses are named, promises muttered. On paper, or rather, in memory, because very little is written, it's done. But the real marriage has not even begun. The real marriage will begin later, in shared work, shared beds, shared winters. As the visitors ride away, the bride's mother watches her daughter's face. She's trying to read what's behind the polite expression. The girl is thinking, so this is it. My life is changing because of silver and sheep, and because my womb can produce heirs. At the same time, in the groom's house, the young man is wondering, will she like me? Will she fear me? Will she ever look at me the way lovers do in stories? Or will we be courteous strangers until we die? These are the early tensions of Viking love, arrangements made for survival, into which people try to smuggle pieces of their hearts. Sometimes they succeed. Sometimes, those buried hopes will come back later as disappointment, anger, or dangerous desire directed somewhere else entirely. Now step into a longhouse on the day of the wedding itself. This time the room is dressed up, tapestries shaken out and rehung, benches wiped down, the best tableware hauled from chests. The fire burns hotter than usual. The air smells of roasted meat, yeast, smoke, and wet cloaks drying in the heat. Outside, horses stamp and snort. Inside, the volume is high enough to rattle the roof beams. At the center of the hall, seated on a slightly raised platform, are the bride and groom. They are the stars of the performance, even if they feel more like props. The bride's hair is dressed carefully, perhaps partially covered if local custom demands it. She wears a new dress, heavy with brooches and beads, and at her belt, the future keys of her household, occasionally touched and admired like a promise. The groom wears his best tunic, his good cloak, and his sword laid across his knees, a very unsubtle symbol of protection, honor, and expected virility. Around them, people eat and drink and watch. Wedding humor is surprisingly timeless. Old men make jokes about conjugal duties. Women nudge each other and whisper about previous weddings that didn't end well. The bride laughs at the right moments, but her stomach feels like a bag of stones. She watches the man beside her and thinks, I hope he is gentle. I hope he is not a fool. I hope I can stand his breath in the morning. Near the high seat, a respected figure, perhaps a chieftain or a law-knowing man, recites the official parts. He names witnesses. He describes the exchange of property. He pronounces blessings in the name of the old gods, or, in later times, perhaps the Christian God as well. On the surface, this is all about legality. Underneath, everyone is also reading emotion. Does the bride look content? Does the groom look proud? Does either one look like they'd rather bolt for the door? Pay attention to how visual this is. If you were the video editor, you'd linger on the way hands pass a ceremonial cup from one to another, on the tight line of the bride's mouth, when someone cracks a crude joke, on the way the groom glances not at his bride, but at a powerful uncle whose approval he needs. This is a contract wrapped in theater. The community must see it to believe it. And then there is the bed. Somewhere in the house, or perhaps in a small separate building, a bed is prepared. Clean bedding, maybe a special sheet, maybe decorations. In some traditions, the bed is blessed with a hammer to invoke Thor's protection and fertility. The idea is simple. What happens in that bed tonight seals what has been agreed in the hall. A marriage not consummated is a marriage that can be challenged. At the end of the feast, amid laughter and innuendo, the couple are escorted to that bed. Imagine how it feels to walk through a crowd that is cheerfully, loudly imagining your near future. Some guests might escort them right into the bedchamber, set torches in brackets, and then finally withdraw, leaving them alone with their nerves, their expectations, and whatever they have or have not yet said to each other. For some couples, this is a beginning that will grow into partnership. There may be nerves, awkwardness, maybe even a spark of affection that surprises them both. For others, the bed is simply an extension of the contract, a task to be completed so everyone can stop watching. A wife might lie still and think of dowry, preserving herself emotionally behind a wall of distance. A husband might be drunk enough to blunder, drunk enough to frighten, or drunk enough to fail, and that failure will not stay secret for long. Outside, the guests keep drinking. Some start quiet bets on how soon the first child will arrive. Others, particularly older women, trade knowing looks. They've seen enough weddings to know that a lavish feast does not guarantee a happy winter. In this society, a wedding night is everyone's business. Whether the couple likes it or not, their bodies are now part of alliances, inheritance plans, and local gossip. Tomorrow, when they sit again on the bench as husband and wife, people will search their faces for clues. Did something soften between them? Has someone been crying? Does the bride look proud, resigned, terrified? The contract has been signed in smoke and ale. Now it moves into days of work, nights of closeness or distance, and the slow accumulation of tiny choices. And as time goes on, some of those choices will begin to stray outside the neat lines drawn by law and custom. So what happens when the contract is in place? The bed has been blessed, and life settles into its routine, and then the heart wanders? Imagine a bright summer day on high pasture. The main farm lies far below, small as a toy in the distance. Up here, the wind is strong and clean, and the sheep graze scattered across the slope. A married woman stands with a younger man, talking about weather, fodder, and wolves. To anyone passing by, it's nothing. Work talk. Necessary talk. But if you look at their faces, something else moves there. She is not some teenage girl. She has carried children, buried at least one. Her husband is a decent man, maybe, or maybe just a solid one. Hardworking, loud when drunk, predictable when sober. She is grateful for the roof, the food, the safety. She is also tired, lonely, and sick of being seen mostly as hands and womb. The younger man, perhaps a hired shepherd, perhaps her husband's cousin, listens when she speaks. He laughs at her jokes. He asks what she thinks about the feud down the valley, about the new legal decision at the thing. She feels herself come alive in those conversations, as if there is more to her than chores and pregnancies. Inside her, two voices argue. One says, "This is nothing. You are bored. You like being listened to. Go home, stir the pot, sleep beside your husband, and forget this." The other whispers, "Remember this feeling. Remember what it's like to have someone look at you as if you are interesting, not just useful." Viking law comes down much harder on a wife's adultery than on a husband's. A husband might sleep with a slave or concubine, and As long as he doesn't humiliate his wife publicly, people will shrug. A wife caught in a full affair risks everything: property, standing, sometimes life. That knowledge sits like a stone in her gut. Affairs do happen. The sagas are full of them. Hinted, accused, sometimes proudly admitted. Secret meetings by bathhouses, hurried encounters in storerooms, long looks at feasts. But far more common are relationships that hover just short of that line. Emotional attachments, dangerous friendships, the kind of intense attention that is both a comfort and a torment. Men, too, feel that pull. A husband might find himself drawn to a widow with her own land, impressed by her competence and wit. He might fantasize about a life with her, fewer demands, more respect, while knowing that such a break would tear his current household apart and drag both families into legal and social chaos. Desire, in this world, has to reckon with more than feelings. It has to reckon with the hay harvest, the winter stores, the support you will or will not have at the thing if scandal breaks. It has to answer not just to your conscience, but to your kin. And yet, people are people. Someone lingers too long on a hillside. Someone stays behind to check the sheep when everyone else goes home. Someone pours a cup of ale with a little too much warmth, and someone else notices and tucks that observation away until it's useful. Most of these stories end quietly. The woman on the hill goes home, presses her lips together, and throws herself into work until the feeling fades. The young man decides he likes breathing and marries someone more available. But not all stories end that safely. Someday, in some household, someone will decide that the risk is worth it. When that happens, the line between private sin and public crisis will be crossed. Jealous spouses will move from suspicion to action. Rumors will reach the ears of cousins who know how to turn them into weapons. And then love, sex, and marriage will step out of the shadows and onto the most public stage the Vikings have, the thing. To understand how sharp Viking marriage can be, come with me into a chieftain's hall on the coast. The bay outside is full of ships, some tethered peacefully, some bristling with shields. Inside, the hall is a forest of carved posts and hanging shields, bright textiles and polished metal. This is a place built to impress. At the high seat, a man in late middle age presides, rings on his fingers, gray in his beard. Around him, like a living tapestry, sits his household, sons and daughters from different marriages, foster children from allied families, servants, warriors, and guests. Every person here is part of a network of obligations, loyalties, and grudges. And running through many of those lines is marriage. Look at the chieftain's current wife. She is not his first, perhaps not his second. She is younger, well-dressed, clearly well-born. Her cloak alone represents serious wealth. Today she smiles, passes cups, speaks pleasantly with guests. But behind her composed expression, her mind is a calculating engine. She knows exactly how she came to sit in this place, as a bargaining chip between her father and the man beside her. She knows that her value was measured in fields, in kin, in the level of support her family could offer in a feud. She also knows that her position is not unshakable. If she bears sons, her security grows. If she does not, she becomes replaceable. Her inner conflict is simple and brutal. How do I turn this marriage from a chain into armor? How do I make myself too valuable to be cast aside? She studies the room, notes who seeks her company, who avoids her, which young men glance at her with admiration or calculation. She thinks about whom to befriend, whom to flatter, when to hold her tongue, and when to speak with a little deliberate boldness. For the chieftain, marriage is both shield and spear. By marrying his daughter to the right man, he makes sure that if trouble comes from that quarter, it will come hesitantly. By taking a wife from a powerful clan, he buys not just a partner, but a faction. Sometimes he will agree to an unappealing match for a son because the political advantage is too good to refuse. Sometimes he will refuse a match with a very attractive girl because her family is weak, unstable, or politically toxic. We might call this marriage as foreign policy. Down the hall, a teenage boy squints into the fire. He has just learned that he will be betrothed to a girl he barely knows, from a valley he has never seen. Outwardly he nods and says he is honored. Inside, his stomach twists. What if she hates me? What if I fail to impress her powerful uncle? What if my father's plan uses my whole life as a piece on his board? At the other side of the hall, A daughter listens as her parents discuss her future as if it were a land sale. She knows she can protest, but not too loudly. A girl who fights every suggestion risks being ignored entirely. A girl who never resists may find herself given away cheaply. She must walk a razor's edge, enough opinion to be valued, not so much that she is seen as trouble. Marriage, here, is as dangerous as any weapon. Offer the wrong person, you insult a family. Keep a daughter unwed too long, you look weak or impoverished. Promise someone and then break that promise, you risk feud. For this chieftain, every wedding he arranges is a small gamble that might pay off in peace or backfire into blood. Some women learn to flip this weapon around. A powerful widow might refuse to marry at all, insisting on managing her own estate and forcing local men to treat her as an equal power, not a trophy. A clever wife might turn her fertility and social skills into leverage, convincing her husband to favor her children over rivals. These are quiet revolutions, and they happen in kitchens and bedchambers rather than on battlefields. Still, every time a bride crosses the threshold into this hall, she brings with her more than a chest of linen. She brings the weight of her kin group, their expectations, their grudges. If she is treated well, their friendship deepens. If she is insulted, their swords sharpen. That is why, when love or lust cuts across the careful lines of arranged marriage in a house like this, the explosion can be huge. An affair is not just a private betrayal, it is a political crisis. A broken engagement is not just heartbreak, it is a public insult. And when those things happen, no amount of tapestry and silver can keep the storm outside. In the next chapters, we'll leave this high-roofed hall and slip into side rooms, slave quarters, and the open air of the thing. There, we'll see what happens when people try to use love to climb, to escape, or to wound, and how the law, with all its careful words, tries to keep up with the chaos in their hearts. Come back to a smaller farm, far from the glamour of chieftains' halls. The house here is lower, the roof more patched, the animals closer to the door. The worries are not about fleets, but about fodder, debts, and whether the roof will survive another winter storm. At the table sits a tired man with work-roughened hands. Across from him, a neighbor with slightly better clothes, slightly better boots, slightly better everything. Between them, invisible but very present, lies the future of the farmer's eldest daughter. She moves around the room, quiet as smoke. She brings bread, clears bowls, checks the pot. On the surface, she is doing her normal chores. Inside, she is listening to every word. The neighbor is proposing a match, his son for her hand, in exchange for land use agreements, shared labor, maybe help with a stubborn debt. It's not an unreasonable offer. It's also not the dream she had at 14, watching that kind-eyed boy from the next valley toss hay with easy laughter. Her father's inner conflict might sound familiar even today. If I accept, my younger children will eat more securely. If I refuse, hoping for a better match, I may drag us all down. If I think only of her happiness, I risk everyone else's survival. He glances at her now and then, seeing not just his child but the sum of his investment, the years of feeding, clothing, training, and work. He loves her. He also needs her to work for the family one last time by marrying well. The neighbor is doing his own calculation. He wants a hard-working, capable daughter-in-law, not just a pretty face. He has watched this girl carry buckets, handle animals, manage siblings. He thinks, she'll hold my son steady. She'll keep the house from falling apart when I'm gone. Love rarely enters his mind as a deciding factor. That can show up later, or not. For the girl, the world narrows to a few possible futures. She can imagine them as if they were paths on a rough map. 1. Agree. Move to a better farm. Hope her husband grows into kindness. 2. Refuse. Anger her father. Perhaps wait years for another offer that may never match this one. 3. Fight for the poor boy she actually likes and risk becoming a burden instead of an asset. Viking custom does allow a woman to resist a bad match. But you have to be brave enough to make enemies of your own kin. Many stories hint at girls who dug in their heels and won better terms, or who were remembered as difficult ever after. The line between strong-willed and troublesome is thin, and it is drawn by other people's mouths. Sometimes a daughter makes a quieter rebellion. She may accept the match but secretly negotiate small things. asking that her younger sister can come with her for the first years, that she can visit her parents each summer, that certain heirlooms stay with her instead of the broader family. These may seem like details, but in a world where distance and winter are real barriers, they shape her entire emotional landscape. Look, for a moment, at her mother. She says little during the bargaining, but her eyes are everywhere. She sees her daughter's clenched jaw, her husband's hunched shoulders, the neighbor's greedy glance at their best cow. Her inner voice is a mix of memory and warning. I know what it is to leave home with a chest of linen and a heart full of doubts. I know how long it takes to feel at home in a strange bed. I also know how cold it is to be poor and unprotected. When the men finally clasp hands to seal the deal, the girl's life bends like a tree in wind. She bows her head, as custom demands. Maybe she even smiles. Inside, she starts the slow work of making peace with a future she didn't choose, but will have to live in, day after day. Stories like this, multiplied by thousands, are the quiet engine of Viking society. These marriages keep farms afloat, settle quarrels, and sometimes plant the seeds of future feuds. And in the long run, some of these bargaining chip daughters will become the women holding the keys on their belts, calculating futures for their own children. The question is, how many of them will repeat exactly what was done to them? And how many will try, in small, stubborn ways, to tilt the scales just a little more toward choice? Open another door in this world, and the air grows heavier. We're in the same kind of longhouse, but lower down the social ladder, or sometimes not lower at all, just further from the high seat. Near the wall, away from the main benches, lie the thralls, slaves, people taken in raids or born into bondage. Among them is a young woman who does not speak the local tongue well. Her ears know the rhythm of home songs from far away. Now she falls asleep to words she only half understands and the creak of a house that is not truly hers. For her, love and sex are not concepts to be negotiated. They are risks to be survived. Many free households include enslaved people. The law recognizes them as property. The bodies of thralls can be used, traded, punished. A master or his sons may take a female thrall as a sexual partner without needing her consent or anyone's permission. Sometimes this turns into a semi-stable relationship. She bears children, some of whom may be recognized, perhaps even freed. Sometimes it is casual, ugly, and forgotten by everyone but her. From the outside, it looks like straightforward exploitation. From the inside, the emotions are far more tangled. The thrall woman might fear and hate the man who comes to her pallet at night. She might also calculate, if he favors me, I may get better food. My child might be treated as half of this family instead of just another piece of livestock. If he abandons me, who will protect me from the others? Desire might show up in that mess, or not. Survival always does. Not far away, the legal wife on the main bench lies awake, listening to small sounds in the dark. She hears a board creak near the side where the thralls sleep. She knows, with the deep, ugly intuition of experience, what that means. Her heart hardens, not only out of jealousy, but from insult. It is her household, her honor, that is being undercut. The law gives the free wife more power than the thrall, at least on paper. She can demand that her husband stop flaunting a concubine. She can insist that a rival be sold, freed, or sent away. But using that power is tricky. Push too hard, and she may tear her household apart. Accept too much, and she may find herself replaced in everything but name. Inside her thoughts, a familiar conflict churns. Do I fight for my status and risk making an enemy of the man whose support I need? Do I swallow this insult, knowing that every servant in this house will read my silence as weakness? She may choose a middle path, small punishments, subtle exclusions, a slow war of attrition that makes the rival's life miserable without ever quite stating why. Children complicate everything. A child born from the union of master and thrall may be doted on by the father, resented by the wife, loved fiercely by the mother who knows that this boy or girl is her best chance at a better future. That child grows up in a blur of statuses, half of the main family, half of the servants. At a feast, who do they sit with? Whose side do they take in quarrels? In these uneven beds, love is never just love. It is always mixed with fear, calculation, resentment, occasional tenderness, and the hard grain of necessity. The saga writers, later, will remember some of these women as schemers, seductresses, or tragic figures. They rarely write down how much was simple survival strategy in a world that gave them so few choices. When people in this system finally snap, the fallout is brutal. A wife might arrange for a rival to be sent away or quietly harmed. A thrall mother might risk everything to hide her child, to stop a sale, or to appeal to a more sympathetic member of the household. These private acts of desperation can echo outward, triggering feuds, legal cases, or sudden changes in inheritance plans. And that is why, when the Vikings gather at the Thing to talk about law and justice, they cannot avoid dealing with what happens in the shadows of their own halls. The line between household drama and public order is very thin, and often stained with the same smoke. Now stand on an open field under a wide, cold sky. This is the Thing, the assembly. Tents and booths cluster like bright shells along the edges. Horses stand tethered. Men and women move in loose groups, cloaks snapping in the wind. Somewhere, someone is selling food. Somewhere else, someone is quietly sharpening an axe. Officially, the Thing is about law, boundaries, theft, killings, contracts. But people also bring their beds here. At least, their complaints about what happens in those beds. Today, a case of adultery is being heard. Not just whispered, not hinted in gossip, but spoken out loud in front of neighbors, kin, and enemies. A husband steps forward. He accuses another man of lying with his wife, of dishonoring his household. His voice is steady but tight. You don't need modern therapy vocabulary to feel his humiliation. The accused man stands opposite him, back straight, trying to arrange his face into something between outrage and injured innocence. Inside, his thoughts race. If I deny everything, will anyone believe me? If I admit a little, will that save my skin or make me look weak? How much does his family really know? Who in this crowd secretly wants me to fall? And then there is the woman at the center of the storm. Depending on where you stand in the crowd, she is a victim, a villain, or a fool. The law recognizes her as more than property. She can, in principle, speak for herself, but it also punishes her more harshly for stepping outside the marriage contract. She stands with her cloak pulled tight, eyes scanning the crowd. She is thinking, whatever I say now, I will not be the same woman when I walk away from this place. If she claims force, she may win legal sympathy, but acquire a permanent shadow on her name. If she admits desire, she risks everything. Divorce, loss of property, maybe physical punishment. If she stays silent, others will narrate her story for her, and their version will stick. The law speaker recites the relevant rules. Fines for injury to honor. Grounds for divorce. Conditions under which a man is justified in killing a caught-in-the-act lover. To our ears, some of it sounds shockingly brutal. To them, it is an attempt, imperfect, evolving, to tame chaos with words. Listen to the murmurs in the crowd. People are not just reacting to this couple. They are checking their own positions. The man who has been flirting a little too boldly with his neighbor's wife shifts uncomfortably. The woman who has long suspected her husband's business trips pays sharp attention to what counts as proof. Law is being made here, but so are mental notes. The outcome may be a carefully staged compromise. The accused pays compensation. The husband gains some face-saving advantage. The woman returns to her family or is formally divorced. Everyone tries to walk away looking as intact as possible. But the judgment can also ignite or worsen a feud. Someone may feel the fine is not enough to wash away shame. Someone may leave this field already planning a more direct answer with steel and fire. Whatever the verdict, one thing is certain. These proceedings will be retold, embroidered, argued about in longhouses for years. Each retelling will shift the weight of blame a little, add or subtract sympathy, turn the main figures into cautionary examples or dark heroes. The law has done its best to manage love gone wrong. Whether that's enough to keep the next scandal from boiling over is another question entirely. Because while statutes can be memorized and recited, desire has never been particularly good at listening. Not every broken marriage ends in blood or public shaming. Some end with something quieter but, in its own way, just as dramatic, a divorce. Picture a longhouse at midday, empty of its usual crowd. The animals are outside, the children sent to neighbors. In the half-dark, a woman stands near the marital bed. Her hands shake slightly, but her voice, when she speaks, is clear. She recites the formula that ends the union, declaring herself separated from her husband at the bed, at the door, in front of witnesses. This isn't just private drama, it's a legal act. Viking law, especially as later written in Iceland, gives women more scope to leave than many later European systems. A wife can divorce for repeated violence, for serious insult, for failure to support her, for certain sexual failures. But don't let that freedom fool you. The price is high. She risks losing security, social standing, and the protection of her husband's kin. Inside, her thoughts are tangled. I cannot stand another winter like this. I cannot keep pretending nothing is wrong. But will my brothers take me in? Will my children come with me? Or be used as bargaining pieces? Will I spend the rest of my life as the woman who couldn't keep her husband? She is choosing, consciously, a different kind of hard life over the one she already knows. For a man, being divorced, or left, is its own blow. His pride is wounded, his reliability questioned. Future matches may see him as damaged goods, too hot-tempered, too poor, too weak to hold a household together. He may tell himself, and others, that he is well rid of a troublesome wife, but the gossip at feasts will add footnotes to his name. Widows and widowers stand in another liminal space. A man whose wife has died must quickly decide, remarry for the sake of his household, or manage alone with hired help and unmarried daughters. A widow with land becomes the center of a different storm. Suitors circle, some respectful, some calculating. She has tasted marriage already. She knows what she can endure and what she will no longer tolerate. Many second marriages are more pragmatic and, paradoxically, more peaceful than first ones. A middle-aged farmer marrying a widow is not looking for youthful passion. He wants a partner who understands work and weather, who will not panic at the first sign of trouble. She wants someone who will respect the household she has built, not treat her like a fresh girl to be molded. In their private thoughts, both may be more honest than they were in youth. I know I snore. I know he limps. I know neither of us looks like the heroes in the sagas, they might think. But maybe we can sit on the same bench without dread. Maybe that is enough of a miracle. Children watch all of this closely. A son sees his mother leave a cruel husband and survive. He learns that marriages can be ended, but not lightly. A daughter sees her widowed aunt choose to remain single, running her own small farm with a few servants. She realizes that wife is not the only adult role available. Rare, risky, but possible. These patterns of departure and reformation don't usually make it into the big heroic tales. They live in the background, in genealogies and legal documents. Yet they quietly reshape society. Each woman who walks away from an intolerable marriage, each man who accepts a less landed but kinder spouse the second time around, nudges norms a fraction. Over generations, these nudges accumulate. People remember that so-and-so's grandmother left her first husband and still died respected. They recall that the prosperous farmer up valley is the child of a widow's second match. Life itself becomes the argument that, while marriage is central, it is not always final. And all the while, the old expectations cling on. Even those who dare to leave still carry the voices of neighbors in their heads, judging. Because in the Viking world, as in ours, the hardest court to win in after a breakup is often not the official one, but the court of local opinion. Some stories slice through a community so cleanly that everyone remembers where they were when they heard. In one coastal district, people will still be talking, years later, about that thing where everything came out. Imagine it. A chieftain's relative, respected, married, father of children, is accused of carrying on an affair with the wife of another powerful man. At first it's just whispers, a lingering look at a feast, a servant who saw too much in the storehouse, a pair of people who always seem to be in the same corner of the room. Most of the time, such rumors stay safely in the dark, managed with sharp words and slightly tighter leashes. But this time, something tips. Maybe the husband finds them in a compromising situation. Maybe a rival fans the flames for his own advantage. Either way, the story refuses to stay small. By the time of the next thing, it's one of the main reasons half the district shows up early. On the field, the accused man stands with his kin clustered behind him like a wall. He knows the stakes. If he admits everything, he risks fines, lost honor, perhaps even his life if the law is interpreted harshly. If he denies it, he must be convincing enough to drown out a sea of knowing looks. Inside, two drives wrestle. Protect yourself and tell the truth. Honor culture loves the idea of confession and atonement in theory. In practice, most people are more attached to staying alive and solvent. The woman involved is in an even tighter bind. Her husband's honor is already wounded. He stands there radiating cold fury. Her lover's fate is being weighed. Her own future is out on that field with them. She chooses each word with surgical care. Did she consent? Did she resist? Did she initiate? Each possibility carries a different sentence in the court of law and the court of gossip. The law speaker again lays out rules, this time with the whole crowd leaning in. Compensation, grounds for divorce, permitted violence, forbidden violence. The phrases are dry, but their implications are not. Somewhere in the crowd, another woman listens and thinks, if I am ever cornered, what protections do I actually have? Somewhere else, a man who has been taking too much for granted with his servants wonders how much risk he's really running. Reputations swirl like smoke. Some see the accused man as a reckless fool who has endangered his whole family network for pleasure. Others secretly admire his daring, even as they denounce him. Some see the woman as a temptress who broke the sacred peace of marriage. Others know her husband's temper and quietly wonder what her life was like before this. The final verdict might be careful, even artful. Fines arranged so no family is completely ruined. A public declaration that the marriage is over, her dowry restored. Perhaps exile for the man, or at least a period away from local politics until tempers cool. On the surface, order is restored. But once people go home, the retelling begins. In one household, the story centers on male honor. He was wronged. He took it to the thing like a man. He got justice. In another, it becomes a warning. See what happens when you let a woman read too many sagas and think she's in one. In a third, told quietly over spinning work, it's a cautionary tale about loneliness. Pay attention to your wife, or someone else will. Every version says more about the teller than about the actual events. The scandal becomes a touchstone. Future arguments about proper behavior will circle back to it. Parents will remind their children, don't be like, followed by whichever name fits the point they want to make. And under all of that, the people actually involved must keep living their lives with faces that now mean adultery before they mean anything else. In a culture that records so much in memory and story, to be fixed in this way is a kind of social death. And yet, even after such a shock, people will flirt at feasts again, walk in pastures again, take quiet emotional risks again. The knowledge of danger never quite kills the lure of connection. It only teaches people to hide better and to listen carefully at doors. Sometimes, the thing's verdict isn't enough. Wounds to honor can fester long after fines are paid and divorce is decreed. When that happens, the story moves from the assembly field to a quieter, more dangerous setting. Picture a misty morning at the edge of a stream. Two men stand facing each other, each with a small knot of kin behind him. Officially, this meeting might be about land boundaries or compensation for damaged property. Unofficially, everyone knows it's about what happened between one of these men and the other's wife, sister, or daughter. They have already gone through the legal steps. They've argued at the thing, perhaps even accepted a settlement. But something in the injured party refuses to let it stop there. Maybe the compensation felt too small. Maybe the gossip never died down. Maybe every time he walks into a hall, he hears his own humiliation in the way the laughter dips and rises. Inside him, two scripts fight. One is the cautious voice that wants to avoid more trouble. The other is the old, loud song of honor culture. If you let this stand, you are less of a man. If you let him breathe the same air unchallenged, your sons will inherit your shame. The other man is no calmer. He may not even be guilty of what he's accused of, or perhaps he's guilty and afraid. Or perhaps he's guilty and furious that his companion in sin is being treated as a victim while he alone is dragged out here. His thoughts churn. If I apologize again, I look weak. If I fight and lose, I die a story. If I fight and win, I may have just turned an insult into a blood feud. Their kin try to help them find a path that saves face without spilling blood. This is the constant tightrope in Viking society. allowing for explosive emotions without letting them burn down all the social bridges. But every compromise offered feels, to someone, like defeat. At some point, whether by plan or by the sudden sharp word that flips a mind, the swords come out. Real fighting is fast and ugly, nothing like the graceful duels of movies. Mud sucks at boots, hands slip, someone trips on a stone hidden in the grass. Blow follows blow. The wives and sisters who are the ghost center of this quarrel are not here. They are back at their houses, trying to pretend they don't know what the men are doing this morning. When it's over, blood stains the wet ground. One man lies dead or badly injured. The other stands breathing hard, already hearing in his head the sagas he hopes will be told. The brave stand, the righteous vengeance, the honorable victory. What he cannot yet hear are the quieter stories. The widows, the orphans, the woman who now must live with the knowledge that she was the spark, however unwilling, for this. Back in the halls, the killing will be folded back into law. Was it legal under the circumstances? What compensation is now due? How will king groups rearrange themselves around this new absence? But beneath the legal sorting, everyone knows that what really drove this was not just adherence to the rules. It was the raw, unbearable feeling of being mocked, diminished, or made small in front of others. Sexual transgressions, suspected or real, provide especially powerful fuel for such fires. They invade the most intimate space, marriage, and then spill out into the most public arena, reputation. A theft of cattle can be paid for. A stolen sense of dignity is much harder to price. Over time, communities learn from these explosions. Some become more cautious about making accusations. Some become more careful about who is allowed to be alone with whom. Some double down on surveillance and control, especially of women. Others quietly drift toward a slightly more forgiving attitude, having seen too many lives wrecked over what began as a few stolen glances. But in any given valley, at any given time, honor can still pull a sword from its sheath faster than common sense can catch the hand. Not every shift in Viking love and marriage comes with shouting and blood. Many of the most important changes happen so quietly that no lawman ever hears of them. Picture a longhouse at dusk. The day's work is done. The animals are fed, the tools put away. On the main bench sit a man and woman in late middle age. Their hair is threaded with gray. Their hands are scarred and stiff. They have been married for decades. They have buried some children and watched others marry, foster, or sail away. They share a bowl of food without speaking much. Their arguments these days are less about passion and more about who forgot to bring in the firewood. But watch the small gestures. When he shifts, she moves the bowl so he doesn't spill. When she winces and rubs her shoulder, he notices and, after a moment, stands up to finish a chore she would normally handle. This is not the stuff of sagas, but it is the bedrock of real marriages. In their early years, he might have tried to rule the house like a small chieftain, and she might have accepted more than she should have. Maybe he took liberties he now regrets. Maybe she swallowed anger that has slowly cooled into irony. Over time, though, they have both learned a few things about each other. What really matters, what doesn't, how far they can bend without breaking. Inside him, there is a recognition he would be embarrassed to say aloud. I would not have this farm without her. I would not know half the news, half the small dangers, if she were not paying attention. Inside her, there is a similar, grudging truth. For all his foolishness, I don't want to see that bench empty. I know how to talk around his pride now. I know which battles to fight and which to let go. In relationships like this, quiet rebellions have already happened. Maybe she refused, years ago, to let him take a second wife or concubine into the main house, and made it stick by threatening to go to her brothers. Maybe he backed her up at the thing when she argued for a daughter's right to better terms in marriage. Each small act pushed the norms a hair's breadth. Their children have been watching. A son, remembering the everyday cooperation he saw, may be more inclined to treat his own wife as a partner instead of a subordinate. A daughter, seeing that her mother did not accept every indignity, may feel emboldened to speak up a little more at her own betrothal negotiations. None of them will say, "We are revolutionaries, changing gender norms." They will just live slightly differently, and then their children will adjust again. Change also trickles in through stories of other households. Someone's cousin in another fjord lets his wife attend more legal meetings. Someone's aunt refused to remarry and successfully ran her own small farm. These examples pass around like gossip but work like blueprints. If she did it, maybe I can too. Religion adds its own nudges. As Christianity spreads, new ideas about one man, one wife, about indissoluble marriage, about sin and forgiveness seep into the old frameworks. Some couples seize on these ideas to refuse polygamy or to stay together when others might have split. Others quietly ignore them when they conflict too much with reality. The result is not a sudden revolution, but a slow layering. None of this makes Viking marriage easy or equal in our modern sense. But it does mean that, over time, the gap between what the law says and what people actually do at home widens in interesting ways. A wife may have officially limited rights, but unofficial veto power over certain decisions. A husband may have the legal right to certain behaviors, but internalize a taboo against them from watching others crash and burn. If you could sit at this bench for years, you would see 1,000 tiny negotiations. Who controls the keys? Who decides where the children foster? Who chooses when to forgive a slight and when to let it scar? These negotiations, repeated across thousands of homes, are where the real history of Viking love and marriage is written, not in sagas, but in habits. And in that, their world is very much like ours. The law might define the outer boundaries of marriage. The real shape of it is carved, day, by two imperfect people trying to share a life without murdering each other before old age does. To understand how Vikings thought about love, sex, and marriage, you also have to listen to the stories they wrapped themselves in at night. Imagine a winter evening when the work is done and the dark presses close outside. People gather around the fire. A storyteller begins, and suddenly the hall is crowded not just with farmers and their families, but with gods, giants, heroes, and very complicated relationships. There is Freya, goddess of love and fertility, who takes lovers, trades treasures, and cries tears of gold. There is Odin, wandering and unfaithful, with a wife, Frigg, who knows much and says little. There are gods who dress as brides to trick giants, women who demand bloody revenge as proof of love, men who choose their partners against all advice and pay the price. These divine tales are messy. They are full of jealousy, trickery, breaking, and mending of bonds. When people laugh and gasp at them, they are also processing their own situations. A woman whose husband has a wandering eye might listen to Odin's escapades with some very dry amusement. A young man attracted to a bold, outspoken girl might think of Freya and feel both excited and wary. Then there are the mortal sagas, told and retold. They feature wives who goad their husbands into action with sharp tongues. They show couples whose love is strong enough to draw them into disaster. They show marriages arranged for politics that nevertheless grow into deep partnership, and others that stay cold until death. In these stories, women often have more voice and agency than we might expect. They make vows, lay down conditions, sometimes even propose their own terms. But they also suffer terrifying consequences when things go wrong. The emotional landscape is familiar, the stakes are higher. The listeners pick out what they need. A girl about to be married might cling to the tale of a clever wife who saved her family by manipulating a situation carefully. A boy, afraid of becoming a henpecked husband, might focus on the story where a man throws off a domineering spouse and regains his freedom, conveniently ignoring all the collateral damage. As Christianity moves in, a new set of stories joins the old. One God, who supposedly cares about what you do in your heart as well as in your bed. Biblical tales of faithful couples, dangerous temptations, polygamous patriarchs, and strict rules about adultery. Priests preach about indissoluble marriage, about wives obeying husbands and husbands loving wives as Christ loved the church. The overlay is striking, but it lands on a culture that already has its own deep narrative grooves. Some people use Christian ideas as leverage. A woman might argue that her husband's concubine is a sin that must stop. A man might use the new moral language to condemn a rival's behavior more harshly. Others quietly compartmentalize. What the priest says on Sunday is one thing. What happens when the ale is flowing is another. Together, all these stories, pagan and Christian, local gossip and grand saga, create a set of scripts in people's heads. When they face a choice in love or marriage, they draw, consciously or not, on those scripts. Do I want to be like that tragic lover who chose passion over everything? Do I want to be like that patient spouse who endured and was eventually honored? Do I want to be feared, admired, pitted, envied? The trouble with scripts is that real life rarely follows them cleanly. A man who imagines himself as a hero choosing love over duty may discover that, in his case, it just makes him look reckless and stupid. A woman who tries to be the long-suffering wife might find that endurance, in her story, leads not to reward, but to an early grave and ungrateful children. Yet, even their failures become stories for the next generation. In this way, Viking ideas about love, sex, and marriage are constantly being negotiated between myth and mud. High tales of gods and heroes set dazzling, impossible standards. Everyday lives tug those standards back toward what the fields, the fjords, and the winter stores will actually tolerate. And somewhere between those poles, two ordinary people on a bench try to figure out whether they are fighting like a saga couple or with just having another argument about who left the door unbolted last night. By the time the Viking Age fades into what we call the Middle Ages, much has changed, and much has not. Law codes are written down more systematically. Christian rulers and churchmen work to reshape marriage into a stricter institution. One man, one woman, ideally for life, with the church claiming authority over the bond. Some of the old pagan rituals, blessing the bed with Thor's hammer, calling on specific gods, are officially frowned on or replaced with Christian prayers. But if you look closely at the written laws in places like Iceland and Norway, you still see very familiar concerns. There are still detailed rules about betrothal, dowry, bride price, divorce grounds, inheritance rights of legitimate and illegitimate children. The words change, the underlying worries remain. Who gets what? Who is responsible for whom? How do we stop the chaos that erupts when love and sex ignore the tidy lines? Sagas written down in this period look back on the Viking ancestors with a mixture of admiration and moral distance. They tell tales of strong-willed wives, dramatic divorces, bloody revenge for seduction and insult. At the same time, the texts occasionally pause to note that this was before Christianity, as if to say, they lived differently then, we know better now. It's the medieval version of, well, it was the 80s. Yet everyday practice stubbornly resists simple narratives. In some areas, divorce becomes rarer under church influence. In others, it remains functionally common through separations and informal arrangements. Informal unions, affairs, and quietly tolerated concubines do not vanish because a priest disapproves. They just wear different names. Widows continue to wield surprising leverage, especially in places where property customs still give them room to maneuver. Daughters still get married off with an eye to land and alliances, even if the priest insists on talking about spiritual union. Young men and women still meet at feasts, at markets, at the church door, and sometimes follow their hearts in ways that embarrass their parents. If you could interview a woman living, say, in 1200 in a former Viking region, her story might sound both old and new. She might grumble about a priest telling her she can't leave a cruel husband as easily as her grandmother did. She might be grateful for a stronger taboo against certain kinds of violence in the home. She might roll her eyes at young people who've started talking about romantic love in ways that sound more like courtly poetry than practical marriage. The legends of earlier centuries give her examples to admire or avoid. Maybe she idolizes a saga woman who spoke her mind and shaped her own fate. Maybe she thinks those old heroines were too dramatic and prefers the quiet competence of a neighbor who keeps her family fed through every bad year. Either way, the Viking past is still in the room, like a loud relative at a quieter modern dinner. Over generations, the sharp edges of pagan law and custom are ground down. No more open sacrificing to fertility gods for a good marriage. Fewer open polygamous arrangements. More emphasis on mutual fidelity, at least in theory. But the human heart remains as untidy as ever. Parents still use stories of ancient scandals to scare children into good behavior. People still gossip about who is seen with whom at the wrong time. Old phrases linger in language, old metaphors and proverbs. When someone makes a disastrously bad match, someone else is bound to say, well, that's straight out of the sagas. In this sense, the Viking world never truly vanishes. It sinks into the ground like an old longhouse, leaving outlines in the soil and streaks in the stories. And when later generations argue over love, sex, and marriage, some of the deepest assumptions in the argument about honor, duty, passion, and property are inherited from those smoke-dark halls by the fjords. So, after all these benches and beds, what do we bring back to our own sofas and screens? Think again of the images we've walked through. A girl standing in the doorway while her future is bartered. A bride gripping the rim of her cup while jokes fly about her wedding night. A wife listening to footsteps near the thrall's pallets in the dark. A man at the thing field deciding whether to defend his pride or save his skin. A middle-aged couple sharing stew in comfortable silence after a lifetime of storms. We dress differently now. Our contracts are written on paper or in apps instead of spoken over ale horns. Our assemblies meet in courtrooms and on social media. But the core questions are suspiciously similar. How much of your heart do you trade for security? How much loneliness is normal inside a marriage? What do you forgive, and what breaks something forever? How much should family have to say about whom you love? What happens to people who don't fit the standard script, who don't marry at all, or who leave, or who love in ways their neighbors don't understand? For Vikings, the answers were shaped by honor and survival. A marriage was not just two people. It was a bridge between kin groups, a strategy for keeping fields and sheep and swords aligned. Love that strengthened that bridge was praised. Love that threatened it could be treated as selfish, dangerous, even deadly. Today we like to tell ourselves that we marry for love first and everything else second. But look closely at modern conversations about marrying up, about finances, about family expectations, and you can still hear echoes of that old calculus. We may use words like compatibility instead of dowry, but the spreadsheet of life is still there in the background. If a Viking woman could sit in your living room and hear how you talk about relationships, she might be shocked by your freedoms. She might envy your ability to leave a bad partnership without starving. She might be baffled by the idea of swiping through faces on a glowing rectangle. But when you confessed your fears, the fear of ending up alone, of choosing badly, of giving your trust to someone who wastes it, she would understand perfectly. And if you could sit in her longhouse, coughing a little in the smoke, hearing her describe negotiations, silent resentments, private joys, and small acts of rebellion, you might find yourself nodding more often than you expect. In the end, Viking love, sex, and marriage were not exotic curiosities. They were human attempts to balance desire and duty under harsh conditions. Some choices were cruel, some were tender. Many were simply the best people could do with the tools and stories they had. We have different tools now, different stories. We can call therapists instead of thing assemblies. We can leave without starting feuds. We can open up whole new ways of forming households. But the old questions still sit beside us like quiet guests by the fire. So the next time you see a Viking raid on screen, remember, for every warrior on that ship, there was someone on a bench at home, holding keys, counting stores, planning marriages, and wondering whether the person who shared their bed was an ally, a stranger, or something in between. And maybe, as you turn off the video and look at your own life, you'll hear, just faintly, the crackle of that distant longhouse fire, and feel a little less alone in the strange, timeless work of trying to love wisely in a world that never makes it simple.